right. Welcome, everyone. We are so excited to have you here tonight. It's going to be a great night of learning together.
Bienvenidos a todos por estar aquí. Oh, so sorry. Bienvenidos, estamos muy emocionados de estar aquí. Vamos a aprender mucho.
We are going to get our interpretation enabled before we go any further, and I'm going to pass it to Diana here to share more about steps so we can all participate seamlessly tonight.
Thank you so much, Chelsea. Hola a todos, mi nombre es Diana y estoy aquí por parte de la cooperativa de Community Language. Estoy aquí porque los organizadores de este evento se han comprometido con la justicia del lenguaje. Esto es donde todos podemos hacer un espacio seguro para poder participar y escuchar en el idioma de su corazón. Esto lo vamos a hacer utilizando interpretación simultánea. En un momento van a ver un icono de un mundo, el cual Irma nos estaba mencionando aquí en un momento. Entonces, cuando prendamos la interpretación, van a ver este icono de un mundo en la parte de abajo de su pantalla, de su computadora, o si está utilizando un teléfono. Muchas veces están donde están los 3 puntos en una esquina hacia la derecha o la izquierda. Cuando selecciona estos 3 puntos puede ver interpretación y de ahí selecciona su idioma. Todas las personas, si hablan inglés o si hablan español, tienen que seleccionar un idioma, al menos que sea bilingüe. Es la única manera en que no debería de seleccionar un idioma. De esta manera podemos hacer una conversación mutua. Les pedimos que si está presentando, hablar con una velocidad conversacional para poder transmitir la mejor versión de su mensaje esta noche. Y si tienen alguna pregunta durante la reunión, déjenos saber en el chat o alce la mano, cualquier manera, y nosotros le podemos ayudar con su pregunta. Muchas gracias. And hello, everyone. My name is Diana. I am here from the Community Language Co-op. I am here because the organizers of this event have made a commitment to language justice. Language justice is when we're able to create a safe space where everyone can participate and listen in the language of their heart. And we are able to do this through the simultaneous interpretation that Zoom provides for us. So in order to use simultaneous interpretation, once I'm done giving out these instructions, you will see a globe icon at the bottom part of your screen. Once this globe icon becomes visible to you, we ask that you click on it, which will say interpretation, and select your language. Everyone who is not bilingual, so if you're an English speaker or a Spanish speaker, you must select a language. So if you speak only English, select English, and if you speak only Spanish, select Spanish. Like I said, unless you're bilingual, you don't need to select a language. If you're using a phone or a tablet, this option is oftentimes found on the 3 dots that appear on like the left side or the right side. Click on those 3 dots that say more. You will see interpretation, and then once again, you will see your language options, which are English and Spanish. So yeah, once I am done with these instructions, that will become available, and please go ahead and click on that. Everyone selecting a language, whether it's Spanish or English, is what allows for us to have a seamless conversation, like if you were speaking to someone with no language barrier. So it's super cool. Please remember to select the language. Once again, if you are presenting or speaking at any time during the meeting, we ask that you speak at a conversational pace. That way we're able to transmit the best version of your message. Spanish is 25% longer than English. So if you're speaking too fast in English, and I'm interpreting into Spanish, that can take me a while to catch up. So if you're presenting and you are going a little fast, you might see me pop up, turn on my camera, and make a motion to slow down. So yeah, if that happens, just take a breath, and we'll slow down a little bit. If there's any questions or doubts at any point, feel free to add them on the chat or just shout them out, and we'll help you out with your questions. So now we'll take around 10 seconds to start interpretation and select our language.
All right, I have hit it to start. So hopefully folks got that prompt. I see a thumbs up. Give yourself another 10 seconds here to select your language. And just another warm welcome for being here tonight. If you need closed captioning, that option should also be available in the lower bar. And hopefully that will make things a little easier. Because we're recording, we are going to be following up with these resources. But yeah, we're going to be covering a lot of great stuff here, as you see here on the screen. A lot of terms, a lot of learning and unlearning. And yeah, we're just so grateful for the support this evening. So thank you again, Deanna. So with that, get my screen operating. A diversity welcome. Today, we welcome people from all over the state. And I'm delighted to be able to say we do have people from all over the state. We welcome older people and younger people. We welcome people of all colors, cultures, ethnicities, and religions. We welcome people of all sexual and gender orientations, identities, and expressions. We welcome diversity, all that makes us unique and also what makes us the same. So as we get the evening kicked off here, I'm going to do some introductions. I'll pass it to my co-host and teammate, Bobby.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us tonight. I'm going to kick off our introductions of our presenters tonight. And as speakers are introducing themselves, they're invited to include a visual description of themselves. A visual description is a way for individuals to describe their physical appearance and provide helpful contextual information. So these descriptions are voluntary, but they can really help with eliminating unconscious bias and help with navigating social situations. Visual descriptions are especially beneficial to people who are blind, that have low vision, or that otherwise have vision loss. So descriptions may include aspects such as hairstyle and hair color, race and ethnicity, age or age range, gender, clothing description, and any additional distinctive accessories or mobility aids. So I'll introduce myself. My name is Bobby Mooney, and I am a campaign coordinator with 350 Colorado. I use she, her pronouns. I live in Denver, and my visual description is that I am a middle-aged white woman with chin-length brown hair, and I use glasses. And I'll pass it on to our next presenter.
Hello, everyone. I'm Chelsea Alexander. I use she, her, ella pronouns. I work as the Movement Building and Volunteer Director at 350 Colorado, currently residing in Golden, Colorado as well. And my inclusivity visual descriptors, I am a white woman with blonde hair, short, and wearing a brown sweater tonight. I will pass it over to Sarah.
Hi, everyone. My name is Sarah. I use she, her, ella pronouns, and I am the Northern Colorado team coordinator. I currently live in Fort Collins. And I am a white woman with brown curly hair that's tied back and a pink strand in front. I wear glasses and I am wearing a green sweater. And with that, I'll pass it over to Sierra.
Hi, I'm Sierra. I use she, her pronouns. I live in Colorado Springs. I am the communications coordinator for 350 Colorado. And my visual description is a white woman with long brown hair, clear glasses, and a blue shirt. And I will pass to Matt.
Hello, everyone. My name is Matt Gose. I am in Newcastle, Colorado, out in the Western Slope. And I am the Roaring Fork team coordinator for 350 Colorado. My inclusivity visual description is I am a tall white man in my early 20s. Wearing a pink shirt and a black hat. And I will pass it to Katessa.
Hi everyone, my name is Katessa. I use they, she pronouns. I'm here, I'm on the board of directors for 350 Colorado, and I am wearing a gray and navy crew neck. I have my long brown hair and some braids. I'm wearing a headscarf with some butterflies on it, and I also wear glasses, and I'm non-binary. I'll pass it to Diana.
And yes, we were so lucky to hear from Deanna earlier. very welcome to drop anything in the chat. I see the heart. Perfecto. We are so glad to be coming together with you all tonight to be doing this work and learning and having fun along the way. You know, we really want this workshop, both tonight and the second part at the same time next week. We want these to be, you know, not only grounding as an opportunity to unlearn and learn things that we may not even be aware of, and seeing those blind spots, but to come away with some initial tools to just make sure that we're doing what we can as individuals and more broadly as a movement to be as inclusive as possible. And hopefully that just leads to better understanding of the ways that we can really just continue to organize most inclusively. We come here tonight to learn with you as well, because we will not claim to be complete experts at this, but we are also students learning in different ways. And we're excited to be having that opportunity to learn from you tonight. So we want to take a quick moment, speaking of grounding down, to ground down in some gratitude and acknowledging how we came to this space. First and foremost, thank you to Angela Davis of iProject LLC. She had been instrumental last year in helping present some of this curriculum you're going to see tonight and next week. And us as presenters here this evening, and to others, shout out to those that supported this work. You know, we acknowledge that these two workshops have been partially developed by a leadership team that carries many different identities of privilege. And we understand that this perspective may resonate most with privileged allies and accomplices, but it's truly our sincere hope that all allies, accomplices, activists, organizers of all backgrounds will find stuff here tonight to be valuable and applicable, and again, an opportunity to learn. And last but not least, muchas gracias, mil gracias to the Community Language Cooperative. Just a little. Thank you again tremendously to make this an inclusive space. We are deeply appreciative of the funding and support too that's even helped make this collaboration possible. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to my teammate, Matt.
Hello again, everybody. I just wanted to kind of echo what Chelsea is saying. We're so glad that you're all here with us tonight. And hopefully we can really show out for you guys and do our best here to make this a great performance. Some of the expectations and container agreements are what I'm going to go over. Our main goal here is to create a safe and nurturing environment that values and supports all members and helps us grow and learn together. In order to do this, we are going to kind of go over what you can expect from us as facilitators. You can expect for us to be judgment-free and to listen, to show patience, to explain to the best of our ability and admit when we may not have the answer, to be honest and open. And if there's anything else that you think we should add, feel free to type it in the chat or raise your hand and speak. If not, I will continue on. So the next thing we'll cover are what we ask of you as attendees. First of all, please put an asterisk in the chat or raise your hand, literally or using the Zoom function, when you wish to speak. Being okay with being vulnerable and honest, maybe even in front of strangers, to come with an open mind and lean into your curiosity, to speak from your own experiences and not the experiences of others, to ask for what you need, to be on camera when you can, to ask questions, and once again, with an open floor, anything else that you all would like to add. All right. Lastly, it is what we can expect from each other. To make sure that everyone has a chance to speak who wishes to and not to talk over each other. To actively listen to understand and to be willing to consider views different from your own. A willingness to drop your mask and show your humanness, and an open floor. We just want this to be an accepting and encouraging environment. With that, I will pass it back to Chelsea.
Thank you. Sorry, I'm a little slow getting off mute. So as we jump into this work here tonight, now that we've set some shared expectations for the space and for one another, just a quick contextualization of how inclusivity works, or how we're really referring to it in the work that we do here at 350 Colorado, which many of you here, I will say, also are a serious part of that. So thank you for that. But really, the inclusivity principles and other ones we're going to talk about tonight, they're realized in how we build an intersectional movement, how our campaigns move forward, how we ultimately win and build regenerative, sustainable, solutions and that future that we envision without fossil fuels. And most importantly, it's really how we work with one another and show up for one another around these shared values. It's really that day to day. It's not something that's, realized at any given point. It's an ongoing journey of always working within this and realizing these values. And Matt will talk more about this here shortly as well. So I won't speak too long about it. But, to give just a touch of that framework of where the inclusivity principles and topics that we're delving into tonight come from, they come from what may be referred to as Jedi work, Jedi values. A show of hands, maybe virtually, or even stars in the chat or something, of how many people here have had past experience in working in these realms and these subjects and realizing these values. It's always helpful to get just a sense of kind of where everybody's at, because we try our best not to assume where anybody is in their journey of learning or unlearning about things. So, right, they are the Jedi of justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. We know that the climate crisis is deeply intertwined with racism and health inequities and a number of other inequities that if we're really going to solve them and build a justice-based future, we must find a way to find solutions that address all these things. It actually gets at the root cause. So just some quick definitions here for folks. We're hoping to further this series that we're putting on tonight to delve into the J and the E and the D. So there's going to be more to come there, but some shared understandings about what we mean when we say justice, being the protection and upholding of the rights of groups that face higher risks. Oh, and I'm seeing, Katessa, was your hand up from earlier, the last question?
Oh yeah, my bad. Let me lower it.
No, all good. Equity, which we're going to dig into tonight in different ways, even, is removing those obstacles such as discrimination or powerlessness or lack of access, so that everybody can have fair and just opportunities for participation and living. And diversity, really being able to fully represent the variety of societal and cultural characteristics that we know are here in Colorado and are in our neighborhoods and our neighbors and everything around us. So I will not go on much longer, because we are really here tonight to dig deep into inclusion, inclusivity, and that's where I'm going to pass this back to Matt.
Awesome. I'm also seeing in the chat here that Britt has something to say.
Oh, I was just raising my hand, but I guess perhaps I did that wrong, but that was also previous.
Oh, all right. Sounds good. All right. Well, I am going to drill down a little bit onto what the main focus is today, and that is inclusion. Inclusion is the act of creating environments in which all people are welcomed, respected, supported, valued to participate, contribute, and can bring their full potential and their authentic selves to the table. Why does this matter? It is so important to see how these movements, our teams that are being built, overall culture, sometimes can miss the mark when these kind of things aren't looked into. When you exclude certain people, when you make people feel like they can't be a part of something with a variety of different barriers, it really relates back to accessibility. And if you can't be there to be a part of something, it's difficult to get those different perspectives. So moving into what inclusion looks like in this work. All liberation is directly connected and therefore needs to embrace inclusivity. A great example of this is the environmental racism case of Bella Romero, an academy out in Greeley, Colorado. And just a little background on that for those that aren't aware. In March of 2017, the Oil and Gas Conservation Committee, the COGCC, approved plans for by Extraction Oil and Gas LLC to drill 24 new oil and gas wells and related production facilities a mere 1,360 feet from the walls of Bella Romero. These places in development were just barely outside of the state mandated setback of 1,000 feet for schools. And yeah, it's just an egregious example of environmental injustice. The student population at Bella Romero is more than 87% Hispanic, Latino, African American, or other people of color. The hourly benzene concentration, which is a contaminant that you do not want to be close to, was 6 times higher than the WHO's lifetime exposure standard. So in saying that, it just goes to say that we need all people, or all different people of different perspectives and backgrounds and experiences to come together to help us solve the climate crisis, because examples like what occurred at Bella Romero are frankly unacceptable and are not something that we want to see moving forward. Certain people seem to be targeted sometimes, or maybe they just feel like it's, people aren't going to say as much, which is why we need to speak up. We want to perpetuate inclusive systems that care for others in this clean energy transition. So, and we can start in our own groups and communities. It's important to bring voices of those that are most impacted to the table to learn from them and follow their lead in the least extractive way possible. It's one thing to assume that you know what somebody's going through, and it's usually not the whole picture. You have to hear it from the source. And with that, I will pass it to Contessa to talk a little bit more.
Hi, everyone. I'll be speaking about how to cultivate an inclusive culture in the way that 350 Colorado has planted seeds and been doing that as an organization. This first graphic shows levels of uniqueness and belonging in a community on this graph here. Uniqueness is going up and then belonging is going to the right there. And when these are low in a community, people feel excluded from the culture. And then when these are high, people feel understood and a part of the group. And that's inclusion, as you can see there. When belonging is low and uniqueness is high, that's when people feel differentiation. And this can also be described as tokenism. And generally people don't feel accepted when they are seen as very highly unique, but not belonging in a community. And then when uniqueness is low and there's high belonging, you fall into the assimilation area. And that is when people are really just conforming to a culture. Their own personal culture doesn't feel valued and they feel like they have to fit into what is provided to them. You can go to the next slide. So 350 Colorado cultivates an inclusive culture through the GEMA's principles for democratic organizing. These are the principles that 350 Colorado uses as a guide for our grassroots organizing. And I'm going to drop this link in the chat as well too, so that you all can use this as a resource and look at it on your own time. But there are 6 principles that they outline. The first one is be inclusive. Second one is emphasis on bottom-up organizing, so really starting that grassroots level and then moving up. The third one is letting people speak for themselves. Fourth is working together in solidarity and mutuality. Fifth is building just relationships among ourselves, so really focusing on that relationship building with each other. And then number 6 is a commitment to self-transformation, because if we don't focus on ourselves, then we won't be able to transform as a community either. So at 350 Colorado, we aim to make everyone feel welcomed and valued, but we also recognize that this doesn't always happen. We are a very white organization, so we're asking you if you see harm, call it out, and please hold us accountable. And then with that, I'll pass it to Sierra, Chelsea, and Sarah to chat about psychological safety. Thank you.
Thanks, Katessa. So next, three of us are going to take turns talking a little bit about what psychological safety is. And I'll just do a really quick overall definition, and that is that psychological safety is the absence of interpersonal fear. Feeling psychologically safe allows people to perform their best at home, school, work, and pretty much in any location with any group. And I'm going to pass to Chelsea.
Yeah. This is such a great term. It was definitely a light bulb moment for me. I remember when I learned it. You know, psychological safety looks like a lot of different things. And ultimately, it leads to a more innovative and stronger community, because there is that, as Sierra said, that kind of removed barrier to not wanting to participate. So ultimately, you know, whether you're working on a team professionally or right at school or at home, it could be feeling open and safe to give feedback or pushing back even against something that really doesn't feel aligned with where you maybe want to see things move. It could even be sharing an idea. You know, some spaces can be dominated by just a handful of voices oftentimes, and just getting out your thought is challenging enough, let alone being met with any type of maybe backlash or disagreement. But also having that space to feel like you can just disagree respectfully. It's not going to lead to conflict or something so unpleasant that you can't handle it. There should be room for disagreement. And as Katessa said, calling in and calling out things as you see them happening. It's okay to admit mistakes and to be vulnerable. It really ultimately helps speak more truth to power. I will pass it to Sarah to talk more on what does it feel like.
So basically, psychological safety just feels like pure authenticity. It feels like feeling listened to and truly heard. It's a genuinely collaborative environment. And it's just so like comfortable and safe that everyone feels okay showing up as the best version of themselves. And that's what we're always rooting for.
Yeah, I always think of college classes or other classes where it maybe just doesn't feel as easy to share. And I'm sure it has to do something with the lack of that feeling. So yeah, we're going to move into some discussion. We have shared quite a bit here. Just to summarize what we just touched on, psychological safety is incredibly important if we're going to improve vulnerability to the degree that we can work together in the best way that we can, so that we can solve this ultimately time-sensitive issue, the climate crisis. But before we give you the layout of this activity and get into the space, we want to take a moment just to speak a little bit more on that bold term of tokenized. Katessa mentioned it earlier, but just to give a little bit more there, Sarah will speak to.
Yeah. So tokenism is essentially when a person is included in a group with the sole intention of making that group appear diverse. So if you've ever heard of the term diversity hire, that would be tokenism. But it can also be when a person is viewed by the dominant majority group as a representative of the minority group. So instead of being seen as an individual person, they are just seen as one trait. And not only that, but they're also seen as like a spokesperson for that minority group, which is obviously very isolating for that person. And it's almost impossible for that person in that situation to feel any sort of belonging in that space.
All right, so now I'm just gonna give you guys a quick description of the psychological safety exercise we're gonna do. And we're going to jump into breakout rooms of about 3 to 4 people per room. And then we're going to do 2 really quick activities. And the first one will be to give examples of behaviors that you've experienced or witnessed that made you or other members feel differentiated or tokenized. That'll be the first little exercise. And then we'll give examples of behaviors that you've experienced or witnessed that made you or other members feel included or valued. So we'll just take turns sharing on those 2 prompts. And we'll be able to repeat those prompts once we get into these breakout rooms too. But right now we're going to split off into groups of 3 to 4 and go ahead and do this exercise.
Sorry, thank you for letting me get through all those pieces there. We're going to pause the recording because, right, we're not recording those discussions. We'll resume that once we come back. So let me just do that, and then we will open up those breakout rooms so that we can get going. All right, welcome back again, everyone. Let us jump into a little post discussion here. The first prompt was hearing about instances in which you or others experienced or witnessed being differentiated, tokenized. Oops, let me get on to the next slide. That might help. Yeah. So using the chat or coming off mute, what examples did folks give? I would love to hear what else there was talked about.
My name is Robin, and I was in Sierra's group, and we were talking about places. A lot of them were in work places, work settings where we didn't feel real comfortable. And I remember being in a group where we were a group of social workers trying to give input into a meeting, and basically the leadership structure just basically took over the meeting and kind of elucidated their perspective. And really, we didn't even need to be there. We all, at the end of the meeting, just thought, well, why didn't they just send us a memo if they already knew what they wanted to hear and what conclusions they wanted to come to? And we just weren't respected at all. And interestingly, most of the people in the group were women, and most of the leadership were men.
Thank you, Robin. Very frustrating, to say the least. What else? What else came up in other groups?
I don't mind hopping in and speaking a little to what we talked about in group 5. Ours was actually, I think, largely centered around education. And if Julia feels comfortable, feel free to jump in at any moment. But I was specifically speaking about barriers you sometimes witness in education. I was talking about a math class who I had a professor that had been tenured for well over 30 years, had taught this math course the same way. I'm not a math brain at all. And his whole thing was you either get the problem right and you get all the points, or you get the problem wrong and you get no points. And the final was 50% of the grade. On top of this, he had posted office hours, but he was never there for his office hours. So I accredit my Russian TA, who, I mean, there's barriers there with that too, with sometimes the way people perceive Russians in today's day and age. Yeah, just how I wouldn't have passed that class without her. And it's crazy that it unfortunately fell on her, you know, and she didn't have to, but to step up and help me when I really needed it. Just, yeah, it's crazy how, yeah, he's definitely, as a math professor, taking her for granted as, you know, a subordinate. And yeah, we had other examples, but that was, you know, education is the specific avenue we talked in. And yeah, Julia had some great things to say too from her experience in education.
Yes, thanks for starting us off, Matt. And just a reminder for everyone to select their languages too. So yeah, I just wanted to reiterate what the vignette that Matt shared actually just highlights white supremacy culture at play, that like either or thinking, black and white, right and wrong, not honoring mistakes or creating that psychologically safe space for learning and growth. And also, interestingly, in that vignette, there's a clear example of inequitable labor practices as well, since the TA was likely paid like a tenth of what the professor was, and was clearly more dedicated to supporting students. And I just also, yeah, in my experience as an educator and a social worker, I didn't have like a specific vignette like Matt did, but yes, just over the years have seen many times in which students of color have been tokenized in by peers of mine, where, you know, they call on a student and say, hey, can you share what this blah, blah, blah might be like for you and your people, or something of that nature. Luckily, we see less and less of that now in the social work and education realm as EDI has been integrated more intentionally over the years, but definitely lots of cringy examples 10 years ago.
Thank you, Julia. Thank you, Matt. Hopefully, yeah, everyone's getting their language selected okay. Thank you for letting us know about that, Gloria. What about included and valued behaviors that came up? What kind of things were discussed or seen? Welcome to use the chat if you prefer, but we'd love to just hear from you before we move to the next section.
I can share one from my personal experience. I feel very included and valued when people use gender neutral language.
Love that. What else? Anyone from group one? Some great discussion in there.
I said when people provide or organizations, I'm so sorry, provide interpretation for any language, not just Spanish.
Very true. Great. Read one more. One more friend.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, John.
Okay. So for included or valued behaviors, I would like to introduce the notion that human beings really need to work together to sort out our relationship with nature and to see ourselves as part of something that is bigger than we ourselves perceive our relationship to be at this point in time. And I don't know that humans have been growing more distant from our ecosystem, but I do think it's happening in this society that we live in. I know there are cultures around the world that are closer to nature, but I do think it's a fundamental breaking point that is more serious than race or culture. Because when humans divide themselves off and say, we can do this thing, whatever it is, it's like we're seeing the results of that. And I think climate change is the trigger that we have pulled. And it's not because people don't get along with each other, it's because people don't get along with nature. And how that happens, I'm curious to know. But the included valued behavior, I would say, is that integrated ecological perception.
I love that. I love that. Yeah, we are not separate from nature.
Can I just add to something John said too? Because I would definitely say that like it's all interconnected, right? Like the othering that we're seeing between races, between people of differing abilities is intrinsically interlinked with our othering from nature, right? And I would also just like to add like I really deeply appreciate when the inclusion of consideration for other species is brought up, because we, to John's point, we have completely separated ourselves from nature, and we forget that we can't do this thing called life on this planet without considering the well-being of all species, not just humans. We're very anthropocentric. We need to be biocentric.
Loved all of that. That was wonderful, y'all.
Can I just summarize real quickly a book by David Hinton called Wild Mind, Wild Earth? And exactly what you're talking about is that if we don't realize at a profound level that everything that has been birthed in and through this universe, we are ultimately kin with, the kinship of all things that walk this earth and walk this galaxy and walk this universe. These are our kin. These are our beloveds. And if we don't get that at the deepest atomic level of each of our beings, you can see the devastation that is already occurring.
Very well said. Thank you for sharing a resource too with the book. Always building that out. Yeah, Matt?
Yeah, I just feel like I can shed a little bit more light, a little bit on what everyone was just saying. I took a class in college that was centered around two different environmental schools of thought, the NEP, or the natural environmental perspective, and then the HEP, the human environmental perspective. And basically you exist in one school of thought or the other, in the sense that you either think that humans exist outside of our environment, or you think that humans are a part of the environment and need to find a way to exist with it. Generally, people that are, more techno optimists will lie on the human environmental perspective. But yeah, it's just interesting. There's some really good reading on that if anyone is interested. It's very cool.
Another great resource. I'm very excited to share what will be the full list of things that come by the end of this. Oh, and I love that in the chat too, John. We'll capture that. Great, thank you. Thank you again for just good discussion. It's always really great to see what can come out of spaces like that when we can really dig in. I'm gonna go back to presentation mode here. Hopefully that works okay for everybody. And we'll add even more content to this just to make sure we don't miss anything. But yeah, we're about to move into some terms and some ways to combat them. And I'll leave it at that and just go ahead and pass it over to my colleague Sierra.
Yeah, so we're going to take turns again talking about 5 different concepts here and how to combat, challenge, dismantle them. And the first one is ethnocentrism, and then prejudice, then privilege, then bias, and then stereotypes. So the first one we're going to talk about tonight is ethnocentrism.
So, ethnocentrism is the tendency for individuals to place their own group, ethnic, racial, or cultural, at the center of their observations of others and the world. So this is actually something that we as humans do pretty naturally. It's kind of how our brain makes sense of the world around us and fills in gaps for things we don't know. When it becomes a problem is when we kind of use this idea of our world, our perspective, to put our culture above other cultures, or our group at the top and other cultures below us, basically saying that we are right, other people are wrong, and other people should be more like us. So that's why it's a problem. But now let's talk about a few ways that we can kind of combat it or challenge it. So the first thing I'm giving to you guys is this quote, be curious, not judgmental. And it's actually kind of up for debate, the origins of this quote right now, but I first heard it on Ted Lasso and I clung to it. I was like, yes, this is awesome. So that's going to be like the overarching theme of this slide. So first we have, try not to believe your assumptions, keep an open mind. As I kind of touched on earlier, judgments and assumptions are something that we do so naturally. If our brain doesn't know something, something's unfamiliar to us, something's new to us, we use judgments and assumptions to kind of fill in the blanks and try to make sense of the world around us. So I could sit here and say, never make a judgment or an assumption again. It's bad and it's wrong. Don't do it. But that wouldn't be helpful because our brain does it without us even thinking about it. So instead, what I want to challenge you guys to do is kind of get curious about those judgments or assumptions that we're making, kind of break them down, talk to yourself about it, figure out what the root of it is, and kind of challenge it. Try to learn more. Maybe it takes some unlearning, some growth, but then once you know more about it, you won't have to make those assumptions. Your brain won't have to fill in any blanks. So that moves us on to our next point. Different doesn't mean weird, bad, or wrong. Everyone has their own group, everyone has their own culture, and different cultures have their own customs and values and belief systems and traditions. And when we grow up in our little cultural bubble, sometimes it's hard to see differences. They just don't make sense with us. They don't align with what we know. And so our brain goes, that's different, that's weird, that's bad, that's wrong. I don't like it. I'm not going to even think about it. So an example is for me, when I see sometimes other cultures that eat bugs, my brain goes, ew, that is disgusting. I would never eat a bug. That's so far from what I know. That's nothing to do with me. But then I can challenge that judgment and I can say, I've never tried a bug. Bugs would probably just taste like whatever you put on it, like chips. I love chips. And also, bugs are the next sustainable food source. So they're kind of ahead of the game in that way. And I take that judgment, I take that initial thought of ew, weird, bad, wrong, and I challenge it. I get to the bottom of it and I decide that maybe I'll try a bug. I don't know. But that brings us to our next point. You don't have to fully understand and you don't have to agree. So maybe you do the work, you do the research, you think you understand, but there's just something that doesn't align or that doesn't make sense to you. That's okay. And maybe you feel like you do understand, but it's just so far from what you know or you believe, and it just is not something you can agree with. That's okay. We're not telling you that you have to completely change your culture. That's not inclusion, that's assimilation. That's not what we want. But what we do want is for you to be able to be respectful of other people and be supportive of their culture and their identity, however different it may be from you. So this is a really cool opportunity that we have to practice perspective taking, which is something that's really challenging because we can't just take off our perspective. Our perspective is based off of all of our experiences and upbringing and culture, and it's how we see and understand the world. So we can't just take that off and try someone else's on. So when someone tells us something that maybe doesn't align with our perspective, we just have to take it as their truth, and we have to try to understand them and support them in any way we know how, instead of arguing because it's not how we see it, because we obviously see the world in very different ways. So it all comes down to just being kind to other people at the end of the day, which I think is something that we can all try to do. So with that, I'm going to pass it to Bobby.
Thanks, Sarah. Hi, everyone. I'm going to talk about the term prejudice. Prejudice is an unfounded opinion, attitude, or belief relating to an individual or a group that represents them in an unfavorable light. So a negative opinion, attitude, or belief that's really not founded. It's not based on accurate information or real evidence. And similarly to what we've been talking about before, Prejudice is something that can happen pretty easily, pretty naturally, if we're not aware of it. It's easy to come to make assumptions and develop prejudices against a group or an individual that you don't know very well without even thinking about it. So it can be totally unconscious, or it can be conscious. Sometimes we have very conscious prejudices that guide our behavior. But we want to work to dismantle our prejudices. So I'm going to tell you about some ways to combat prejudice. First and foremost is awareness. We can do a lot to counteract prejudice if we're aware of it. So expanding our knowledge and our understanding of what is prejudice and discrimination, as well as the negative consequences of prejudice and the errors that are inherent in prejudice and other common assumptions about others. So building your knowledge and becoming aware. And that's exactly what we are doing here tonight. So we're on the right track. Next is contact. Contact can really help dismantle our prejudices. So increasing contact with people from different walks of life, including through the news or books or movies that can expand our knowledge and understanding of the experiences of people in other social groups, can really help. Second is social norms. So establishing what's normal in your social setting and establishing that prejudice is not normal can really help to reduce the power of prejudices. So that looks like challenging people's ideas about what is normal and acceptable. And role modeling. You can do community role modeling of non-prejudicial attitudes. And finally, there's an interesting set of scientific evidence that shows that increasing perceived variability reduces prejudice. So that means increasing people's perception of the variability between individual members of a social group. You know, understanding that, for example, all women are not the same, right? There's a lot of variation within that social group, of course. And that's a big social group, so it's a good example, but there's a lot of variability in any social group you can name, right? And coming to understand that through firsthand experience can really help break down those prejudices. So challenge yourself to pause and think about whether what you are thinking about, if you're relying on stereotypes and generalizations and prejudices, rather than acknowledging the diversity and variability within a group. And I'll pass it on to Katessa.
Alrighty, so I'll be speaking about privilege tonight. And privilege is defined as an advantage held by a person or group based on age, race, ethnicity, gender, class, or some other cultural dimension which gives power over others. Now, identifying privilege, it's important to recognize that each of us are able to hold privileged identities and marginalized identities, and just want everyone to think about what types of privileged identities you may hold and share those in the chat. Identifying our privilege and thinking critically about how we show up in the world is crucial, so I hope that you will engage with this little activity. Chelsea says, I have access to reliable transportation. It's definitely a privilege. What else do we have? And yeah, these can be identities that we hold or also just ways that we exist and are privileged. Matt says, I was financially privileged to attend college. Then we got a couple more. I am white and received a bachelor's degree. I have the privilege of access to higher education. I am white and grew up in middle class. White and American citizen. Thank you all. So yeah, with this, these identities and things that we're seeing in the chat, I want you to keep in mind that privilege can't exist without oppression. So all of these identities that we are sharing and things that we are holding, the opposite of that is oppression. So you all that are sharing that you are white, what is the oppressed group from that? You can share out louder in the chat. Alrighty, so people of color, people that aren't white, are going to be the oppressed group that do not benefit from things like white privilege. Someone else just shared poor in the chat. So the opposite, so yeah, that's an oppressed group that people who are middle class or higher class have a privilege above or power over that group. Yeah, I also want to speak on racism, and racism is power plus prejudice. So reverse racism isn't a thing because that power doesn't exist there. So when people are speaking about reverse racism, they really are speaking on prejudice against a group, which can still exist, but there's not that power dynamic there. We can go ahead and go to the next slide. So with our privileged identities that we were just thinking about, and also the marginalized identities that we can also hold, I want to speak on disrupting privilege and balancing your privileged identities and your oppressed identities. So I think it's really easy for people to lean into their privilege, or excuse me, I think it's important for people to lean into their privilege first, to own that they have caused harm and when they have been harmed. And it's important to recognize that just because you are oppressed doesn't mean that you understand all forms of oppression. So an example of trying to balance privileged identity and an oppressed identity is when something may come up, you may say, oh, I can relate because I grew up poor. But if someone else is speaking about their identity and it is not related to economic status, you can't exactly know what that person's experience is. So you in that moment, if you are from a different identity, try and lean into your privilege more and say, oh yeah, I've never thought about that before. Really own, and being open to being wrong and not understanding others' experiences, because we can't know everything. And so with that, just be curious and open to being wrong in order to try to disrupt your privileged identities and listen to others. You can go ahead and go to the next slide. And I also want to speak on addressing harm, because not addressing something harmful perpetuates oppressive systems. And avoiding conflict or not speaking up in a difficult situation is often easier, but in doing so, we continue to allow harmful ideas to circulate. So an example could be you are in a breakout room and someone says something that is harmful towards a group of people. If you sit there as a bystander and you don't say anything at that time, then you are allowing those harmful statements to circulate. And you are leaning into your privilege in that moment because it may have not harmed you, so you don't have to say anything. And keeping in mind that addressing oppressive or harmful statements halts harm and creates a space for inclusivity. And there are multiple ways that you can do this and how you can address harm. So calling in when a harmful thing is said would be reaching out to that person and having a meeting at a later date to address the harm that was said. So that is a more private kind of scenario. And then calling out would be explaining the harm and calling out the harm in the moment that it was done. So that would be in front of the group of people where the harm was expressed. And you kind of want to use calling in for certain situations and calling out for other situations. And it depends on who is in the space and who has been harmed, and also your relationship to the person who made the harmful statement. So just keep that in mind in the future, that we don't want to perpetuate oppressive systems and want to create an inclusive space through addressing harm when it comes up. And with that, I will pass it to CR to chat about bias.
For bias, I'm going to read two definitions of the word bias first, and we'll just kind of sit with them for a second. But bias can be an inflexible, conscious or unconscious, positive or negative belief about a specific category of people. And the other definition I have for bias is a disproportionate weight in favor of or against an idea, person, or thing, usually in a way that is close-minded, prejudicial, or unfair. Biases can be innate or learned. So those are just a couple of different ways to think about bias, but it's definitely not the entirety of the definition. And I think having talked about kind of some different ways that bias can look, it's also important to talk about some ways that you can try to combat bias. And one of them is similar to what Bobby was talking about earlier with awareness. And that's just sort of recognizing and becoming conscious of the biases that you do have, and sort of thinking about them, questioning your beliefs, asking yourself where they came from. And there's lots of different places they might have come from. It could have been from your family of origin. It could be from work culture. It could be from certain media. It could be from the area you grew up in. It could obviously be related to race, gender, sexual orientation, any number of things. And so just kind of questioning your biases and beliefs and kind of engaging in sitting with them and letting difficult feelings come up, and instead of turning away from them, just kind of sitting with them and seeing what comes up for you and where it goes. And I'm going to pass over to Bobby for stereotypes.
Thanks, Sierra. All right, I got the last term here for you all. Stereotypes. So stereotypes is an exaggerated belief, image, or distorted truth about a person or group. It's a generalization that allows for little or no individual differences or social variation. So kind of similar to some of the other terms we've talked about, like prejudice. But some common types of stereotypes include cultural stereotypes, social stereotypes, racial stereotypes, gender stereotypes, and religious stereotypes. And if you spend a few minutes thinking about it, you can probably come up with some examples in your own mind that you're aware of, stereotypes that we have about different cultures or different genders or different races. And those stereotypes exist out there, and we want to try to reduce their power through examining them and building our own awareness. I've put a little image in here with the intention of making just a little bit of a joke about stereotypes. This is an image that shows kind of the typical stick figures representing a bathroom. And it says, "I'm so sick of the stereotype suggesting that all women wear superheroes capes when they go to the toilet." And I hope everyone can take a little humor in that, just because even though stereotypes are not a laughing matter, we've got to have a little fun with this as we're working to improve our world. So here's some specific ways that you can help combat stereotypes. First up, of course, take note and get curious. Notice when people are using or they're speaking about other people using generalities, and explore where you can shift focus to the individual person, situation, or incident at hand. As you're examining that stereotype, question the fear response. There's often fear underlying a stereotype. And is that fear a learned fear? And can you figure out where or how it was learned? And what assumptions are being made based on that fear? And don't keep it to yourself, right? When you notice a stereotype being used, call in or call out in some cases if warranted. Call it in when it's happening and lead with that curiosity we've been talking about a lot. Curious about the source of that stereotype and the risks of the stereotype at play. And finally, and I think this really applies to a great deal of what we've been talking about, focus on increasing empathy and compassion. You can do that through engaging in service work or volunteering to increase empathy and community orientation. And you can also do it through increasing self-compassion. We can more easily have compassion and understanding for others if we have compassion for ourselves first. And it may feel counterintuitive, but there's a lot of evidence to show that this is actually one of the key components in dismantling so many of these terms we've been talking about tonight, including stereotypes. And with that, I'll pass it on back to Chelsea, I believe.
Yes, thank you, everyone. Speaking of compassion and taking care of ourselves where we need to, let's take a quick 5-minute break. Let's return at 7:35. We're almost done, but we know we've been sharing and talking and sitting maybe for a little. So maybe take these 5 minutes, drink some water, move your body, use the restroom, do what you need, and see you back here at 7:35 for the last smidgen before we're done. All right. Welcome back, y'all. Thank you for being willing for that break. Give you a few more seconds to come back here. We have just one last kind of set of terms, so to speak, to cover before we move into some good group discussion. Actually, we'd love to be hearing from folks once we've covered things. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Katessa.
Yes, I'll be speaking about youth leadership and activism. Just a little grounding. Youth are one of the most disproportionately impacted groups within the climate emergency, and youth leadership demonstrates our investment in today and tomorrow's leaders. And 350 Colorado has a youth action committee, which is a group that is fully youth and youth representation in our community that does so much beautiful advocacy and is an amazing group. So just a little shout out for them there. And then last year, I think a little bit earlier this year, the Youth Action Committee led a webinar called Youth and Activism. I'll go ahead and send it in the chat here, so that if you all want to check this out on your own time, I would highly recommend. Some highlights that we speak on are being a bystander, adult allyship, and then we get more in depth with disrupting privilege. So if you liked the piece I spoke on earlier, I would recommend checking that webinar out. And then I'll pass it to Chelsea and Sarah, sorry, to speak on the next piece.
No worries at all. If anyone has questions about any terms, that is more or less where we are heading. Because, right, this is an additional resource to be explored and hopefully, yeah, learning more directly from youth leaders in the movement. But yeah, let's switch gears here into some group discussion. We wanna hear from you on these three things. You're welcome to use the chat, but we'd love for you to come off mute really here and have a minute. Really, we have more than a minute, but looking at that first item, what are some things we collectively could do to be inclusive in organizing? Leading into what kind of blind spots would privileged climate groups have potentially in the climate movement, and then how those blind spots can cause harm. So I'm gonna go back into editing mode here so that we can capture some of this information in live time as we hear from you. I will say too that part of what we are doing in this discussion is getting things really nicely teed up for next week as well, because we got, of course, a lot more to dig into that relates to this here. But yeah, Tesla.
I would say open the invitation to community organizations. Sometimes we don't know how to participate. And sometimes we know of events that already passed and we just miss the opportunity to participate, So I think that just being more, having more of an open invitation or an open agenda and just with community organizations.
And maybe different ways to share the message besides email, maybe text, call, ask directly.
Yeah.
I would just add to that, not only an open invitation, but a timely invitation, because I know so often I get invitations to things a day before or 2 days before, and I'm already scheduled. And that's really irritating that for things that I really feel strongly about that I want to attend. But, people are just not getting their word out in a timely way. And that it creates exclusivity.
A really good one. What else? Yeah. Irma?
Yo solamente quiero decir que dejemos de ser tan tibios en este movimiento del cambio climático, en la inclusión, en los prejuicios, en las costumbres y en todo lo que se refiere a no querer ser inclusivos en cuanto a proteger nuestro ambiente, proteger nuestra propia vida, nuestro entorno, nuestros hijos. Es muy importante darnos cuenta que ya no falta mucho para que nos acabemos este mundo. Y desgraciadamente hay mucha gente que todavía dice, yo solo qué puedo hacer. A mí no me importa, yo ya me voy a morir. Hay que sufran los que se quedan. Y no se trata de eso. Se trata de realmente ponernos las pilas, trabajar y proteger lo que nos queda. Yo escucho mucho en España, en Italia, en muchos otros países donde hacen marchas, donde hacen movimientos. Y aquí en Colorado, en Denver, yo no he escuchado nada. Solo hacemos reuniones y reuniones y reuniones. Pero creo que necesitamos salir a las calles, creo que necesitamos hacer un movimiento más fuerte para que realmente haya más inclusión, haya más movimiento, haya más gente que se entere qué es el cambio climático, cómo nos está afectando y cómo las diversas fábricas que están alrededor de nuestra ciudad están afectando todo nuestro medio ambiente. ¿Mucho?
Perfect. Gracias, Irma. This is great. This is great. Anything else that's coming to mind for folks around blind spots privileged groups might have, when they can cause harm, whether that's intentional or not? Checking the chat, probably closing up too as things are coming in there.
I put this in the chat, but I think consensus is something people avoid, and I've explored it briefly. I don't have an example of actually participating in a consensus process that actually worked, but I have been following a group that is engaged in it, and it does take facilitation. It takes understanding, and I think an idea that it can be successful, but I see people backing off from it and saying, don't bring consensus into my arena because we already have a system, which is either privilege or, I don't know, debate and conquest. But consensus, to me, the process of consensus, seeking consensus, is missing. And if there was a group or somebody that would be willing to try it out and see, can we make it work even in a small group and become empowered to say, this is a tool that is not being used. It's available and not well utilized. But I don't know. I just keep running up against a wall.
Yeah, thank you, John. Yeah, Bonnie.
Hear me?
I want to speak to the person that just talked about consensus, because I've been part of an organization where we use consensus, and the agreement is that we are non-hierarchical, first of all, and second of all, that if there is a disagreement, we listen, to the reason and try to find, for instance, there several times I've been the one who has disagreed, and I would be asked, can you live with the choice that the rest of the people want to make? So, there are several different ways to help consensus work, but part of the idea is to give each person a voice and a time to speak to, what has been brought up. And it is possible to use it in a group. Thank you.
Thank you, Bonnie. Yes, Anna?
Sorry to interrupt you earlier.
Your audio cut out just as you started.
I think that one time issue and making consensus really requires time and honoring time and people's time. So one of the ways to encourage consensus is to push back about this established norm of time consciousness. I find that that is often used as the reason why you can't hear other people speak, because there's no time for them. But I wanted to say a different thing, and that was inviting experts or just people from marginalized communities to be part of the program. And maybe that is tokenism, but I would encourage paying people to be present if they're underrepresented in groups like the organization. And I don't know if that's tokenism or what, but actively seeking out other voices and finding a way for them to be present in the discussion, and definitely compensating them for their time and their expertise they bring.
Yeah, very well said. We're actually definitely going to talk more about that in the vein of providing stipends to remove barriers for people. But you're right, that conscientiousness about not tokenizing someone in that process, incredibly important.
Eso que acaba de decir esta muchacha anterior, eso se llama inclusión, incluir a toda la gente, no solo a las organizaciones, porque solamente las organizaciones trabajan con el equipo interno que tienen, y muchas de las veces, como decía Tesla ahorita, las otras organizaciones no nos enteramos porque no hay comunicación. Si realmente queremos hacer un movimiento grande, inclusivo, de justicia para todos, creo que lo primordial y lo básico aquí es incluir la justicia climática. ¿De qué sirve que todos queramos ser inclusivos, tener todo lo que es el YEDA, si no podemos respirar, si no podemos tener un lugar limpio para salir al campo, a disfrutar del aire, a tomar un respiro con los árboles? Hay que ser más inclusivos en ese punto. Perdón por interrumpirte. No puedo.
All good. Thank you. This is such wonderful discussion, y'all. I do not want to curve it, but there is one more prompt after this. It's the last one, but really want to just make the space for it and give it justice too. If anything else comes up that you want to share, please drop it in the chat. We will capture it. We'll get it into this slide. And that way we know we all worked collaboratively to talk about these things and to talk more about it next week, as we said earlier. Yeah, let me go back into presentation mode. I like that in the chat too, John. Very true. So last thing here. This is just kind of going more broad and to wrap up the night, really. Space to reflect, space to think out loud, space to ask questions. Anything that surprised you, something doesn't quite make sense even, use a little bit extra context on, or maybe a way you want to move forward, whether that's just for tomorrow or between now and the workshop next week or into 2024.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Is that okay, Chelsea?
Absolutely.
Okay. When we were talking about biases, and you said they could either, or whoever did the discussion said that they could be either learned or innate. That's an epistemological question for me. I don't know how a bias can be innate. Does that mean you're born with a particular bias?
Great
Who
question.
can speak to that?
Let's see. Anyone feeling up? If Sierra, I know you presented on this, but anyone at all too?
I would just assert that I think for me, unless, you know, somebody's got a more information, I think biases and prejudices are learned. I don't know that babies are born with internal prejudices and biases. I don't know. That's a behavioral question I don't know the answer to.
I can speak on it a little bit if no one else wants to. And Robin, yeah, I think that your question is a basic like nature versus nurture question. And I definitely agree with you. I tend to side on the more socialization, nurture side of things. Yeah, I think that our society is based in colonialism and white supremacy. So we inherit a lot of these biases and these prejudices and things from our culture. And so it's definitely something that we learn, but we learn it very, very young. So it's something that we have to continually work to unpack. And that's how the implicit biases or the biases that we don't necessarily see or aren't aware of come out. It's because we learned them so young and they're so ingrained in our culture.
Thank you.
Yeah, well said. Thank you, Robin. Good distinction. I see in the chat too, the youth group or youth leadership being something that surprised someone. That's great. I think that sounds like this pleasant kind of surprise, right? Don't expect it, but then it happens and it's great. Yeah, Tesla, if you get a chance to watch that through, I think you'll feel that too. Such an impressive group of leaders.
Nice.
What else? What else are folks wanting to talk about in a question or something that surprised you or a way you want to move forward? Yeah, Paul.
I'm having a hard time coming up with the right words for this, but it's kind of like in evolution, the biases and prejudices were important for survival to make people, I don't know, more efficient or not have to work so hard to distinguish others, which used to be important. And I think that what it comes down to is now we need to put more effort into dealing with people as individuals. And it's a lot of work to say, you know, there's 21 people here and I need to deal with each one of you as an individual. But, you know, that's the stereotypes and the biases, those are shortcuts. And we take shortcuts all the time. And we need maybe do a little more work to deal with people as individuals.
I love that. That's right. All that makes us unique and all that makes us the same. Yeah, Bonnie. Oh, so sorry. I think I accidentally
Sorry.
muted.
Sorry. One of the things that came up in the session was about being inclusive with nature itself. And particularly, it seems to me, from having done a lot of work in the realm of learning about Indigenous people and values over the last 6 years, I came to the conclusion that Indigenous people have spent thousands of years on Turtle Island, that's called the United States. Thousands, 10,000 and more, building their own, building cultures in tribes, and the majority of them having a close relationship to land and to the earth, and developing, values out of that survivability. And so moving forward, I would really like the whole question that was raised about including nature, because our meetings, is the earth included in our meetings? Is the earth included in our lives when we make decisions? And to me, that is a basic relationship beyond all others, is the relationship that each human being has with the earth, and that is their sustenance, their, primary source. So I know that it's been something that I have questioned and wondered about, how to bring our culture to recognize that we have to include the earth in our decision making and in our ways of being and doing. So moving forward with this, I would really like to explore that.
I love that. I'm so glad that came up tonight. What a critical form of connection, to say the least. Wonderful. Thank you, y'all. You are welcome to keep this dialogue and conversation flowing with us. We're going to be following up via emails. You have a way to get a hold of us, but I know we're just on the crest of the top of the hour, so I'm going to just pass it over to Matt real fast.
All right. Yeah, thank you all for being here. I feel like this was really good. And yeah, I just really appreciate what everybody had to say. A lot of new perspectives. Yeah, so please join us for our Jedi Embracing Inclusive Organizing workshop, which is the part 2 to this, in Organizing for Inclusivity. That is Tuesday, December 12th from 6 to 8 p.m. on Zoom. And please register for access to the Zoom link if you haven't already. And then, as always, we are open to feedback, suggestions, and ways to make these spaces more accessible and inclusive. If you have any ideas, feel free to email us at volunteer@350colorado.org, and we'll get back to you. But thanks again for being here. We really appreciate it.
I'm going to push us there, but yeah, what Matt said, thank you all so much. We value and respect your time, your passion, and your energy, just more than words can say on a Tuesday night. So hope you have a wonderful rest of your evening. I hope to see you back next week when we really wrap up the rest of the content. And yeah, just take care of yourself between now and then. Hopefully we're crossing paths one way or another.
Gracias y buenas noches.
Sí, también.
Gracias.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you.